You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. As many of you know, we get to talk policy and politics because we live in Washington, D.C., and we represent the industry on a litany of issues. There's been a lot of change, even over a small period of time with our country and the race for the White House, also Congress, and down ballot races. And so I think this is our chance to kind of tell you a little bit about what we perceive as kind of professionals doing this for many years on campaigns and on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch, what we see. And hopefully we can share some things that you're not going to hear on CNN or MSNBC. And hopefully if we do our jobs right, we'll bring it back to footwear, where it matters for your job, as well as for your family. So joining me today is Matt Priest and Thomas Crockett. I mean, let's just start where we are, which is it's a complete revolution. We're starting from scratch with the presidential race, which at the end of July, where we're recording this, is something we haven't seen in decades in politics, where traditionally when you go to convention, many years ago before the parties orchestrated who was going to be the nominee, and then it was just kind of a foregone conclusion where there were floor fights. This is completely different from where we are today. In some ways, it's unexpected. If it was May 2024 and then early July 2024, it was likely that this was going to happen. So I think trying to understand some of the chaos and some of the sea change that's occurring is important, guys, but also how we look at what policies may be enacted, because now, again, we have a new candidate with Harris now running for the Democratic ticket. It seems likely she will have that. No qualms about that. And obviously, the Republicans just nominated Donald Trump once again. And so I think it behooves us to look at what may happen and where we're watching the race in the coming months. But also the policies of these two leaders and what may happen for footwear companies.
Yeah, go ahead, Thomas.
I think, too, also, we get a lot of questions from members on, like, what's going to get done this year. And I was on the Hill, actually, just yesterday, meeting with congressional offices, and the outlook is not much, if anything. I mean, we're very caught up in a presidential election right now. Members of Congress are. And regardless of that, there's just not a lot of time, not a lot of legislative days to get anything done. So we have some big items out there like the miscellaneous tariff bill, generalized system of preferences renewal. There's some IP bills we're working on, Shop Safe, for example, which would really crack down on counterfeits. And so, talking about these issues, even an issue like cracking down on counterfeit goods, it's not that there's a lack of support for that. There's a lack of time. There's a lack of time to actually get that done. It doesn't seem like it because we're, there's months away. But what happens in an election year is members of Congress go back to their districts, always in August for the August recess. And then this year, they'll be gone a lot of October. They're talking about adding another district work week, recess week, and a lot of members will be campaigning during that time. It's a huge historic election. And so it's very unlikely to get anything done. And then I think it's also very, very unlikely to get anything done during the lame duck either, which either candidate, there'll be a lot of tea leaves to be read on what's going to happen on trade, depending on who wins. But I don't think it happens in December.
Yeah, I mean, that's all fair points. And for those who are not political junkies, which we admire those who aren't in some regards, lame duck is that period between the election and the new Congress. So that that November, December time. And there's not a formula as to how long they'll come back for, what needs to be done, those types of things. So, look, we're recording July 24th just to give a timestamp on when because this will come out. I think next week, actually, as we put this together, because it'll change even between now and Monday. But if you think about it, it's been less than a month since we had the debate, right? Less than a month ago, where we had two candidates debate. The current president obviously fared very poorly at the time, and that's no crack analysis. And so since that time, we've had a terrible debate, and a debate that's happened in June, I should say, that was very early for the cycle. We usually have them post Labor Day in the presidential election year. So we had that. We had then this movement to push them out, which had kind of these different peaks and valleys to them. The Clooney op-ed, the appearance of the Hollywood fundraiser that clearly kind of tapped in Clooney to want to do something. So this like continued course, and you have the attempted assassination of the president, and now we have the current president saying not going to run for re-election, all within less than a month. I mean, if you're a political junkie, this is just like, this is like heroin, right? So it begs the question, like what is coming next, and then how will this stabilize, and what will polling look like, and all that. But to both your point and Thomas's point, there are things that we can look at now on the record to ascertain and provide analysis as to what may come depending on who wins. We have the former president telling House Republicans a number of weeks ago privately, and then more publicly speaking about it, that he's looking for a minimum tariff on all goods, a 10%, 60% tariff on Chinese goods. He does what he says he'll do on trade, so we have to take him very seriously, and so we will, and we are. And then you have statement after statement from the vice president as she was actually running for president in 2019 and other times, saying she's not a protectionist Democrat. She thinks Trump was basically doing trade by tweet, and it was disastrous and it impacted families, as we talk about 301 tariffs. But if we do trade negotiations, she wasn't for NAFTA, as she said, and she wants more environment and labor provisions and free trade agreements. But all that is the last thing I'll say is now the battle lines are in the blue wall, right? It's Pennsylvania, it's Wisconsin, it's Michigan. And this, as the RNC showed us, Republican National Convention showed us, the RNC is all about, the Republican Party is all about working class voters. Like, that's their thing. And they're going to put J.D. Vance in Pennsylvania, and he's going to use that as a launch point for the entire rest of the campaign into the other parts of the blue wall. Democrats have to win that to win. Republicans usually have to win Ohio and Florida to win, and Trump pretty much has his locked up. So the battle is in those states. And so it begs the question, in debates and statements, what will the vice president, will she start to pivot towards a working class kind of posture when it comes to trade? And will we be back essentially where we were before, which is tariffs are good no matter what party you're in, China sucks no matter what party you're in, and Americans should be paying more for the consumer goods no matter what party you're in? And I don't see I don't see an opportunity there to where that might change. But tell me if I'm wrong. You guys are smart guys as always, and you might have a different take.
We don't know a lot about, surprisingly, where she is on trade. And I do think those key battleground states that you highlighted, we'll see a lot of rhetoric between, now and the election. And those are key voters. I think that the trade message resonates there. But does she try to, she's been very critical of President Trump's tariffs before, in the past. And of course, then again, President Biden was as well. He said one thing, and he even said it in the Rose Garden again about how, tariffs would raise prices on consumers. He said that as he was continuing the Trump tariffs. And so it's really, it's hard to know. I mean, I think with the tariffs in place, they're now a revenue stream for the government, a huge revenue stream. The Biden-Harris administration just raised tariffs in certain sectors like batteries, medical products, semiconductors, electric vehicles, significantly, quadrupling them in some cases. So is she going to come in and completely shift the posture of the administration? It's hard to know she hasn't really been involved. That's one area where, she hasn't been very much involved in the trade side of things. So we really don't know where she is on that. Andy, I don't know, what you think about that too, if you have the same view.
I just think she's an old school progressive on trade, which is a lot of worker protections. It's about being a little suspect of free trade agreements that may give away too much. She wasn't particularly favorable to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example, even though
she opposed it.
Even though Barack Obama was kind of the flag bearer for that and was kind of pushing for that. And so I think some of it is almost like the old doctor adage of do no harm, right? It's kind of a continuation of what the Biden policy has been, which is in some ways a continuation of what Trump started. I think a lot of what the focus will be around is, to what you guys have said and what I think most people see in the media, building more capacity for important industries to national security and to national defense. And our part of that is our national economy, which is microchips and things like that. So I think a lot of the fights and tiffs we're going to have are around those things with China and others. If there's a free trade agreement that comes up with someone like the UK that shares values and typically has a developed economy, I think there's possibilities there. I just don't think there's possibilities for where we manufacture shoes with the Harris administration. Certainly not with the Trump administration, which is in many ways fully into autarky, which is in essence exactly what China is doing, which is trying to gain as much natural resources and access to minerals and materials as possible to protect yourself, almost isolate yourself in some ways to be self-reliant. It's an old school kind of 19th century thought, or even 20th century thought, early 20th century, that led to World War I and then World War II. And I mean, who knows what level they come up with? Sometimes Trump will throw something out at 60 and it'll come down and negotiate it around and see all that stuff. I am more concerned with his choice for vice president, who comes out of a Rust Belt state, who seemingly doesn't understand blue collar workers. I'll go counter to what the whole narrative is about this guy understanding it. Someone from Yale and an Ivy League education can be from a place and completely forget the people and what happens. And so I think he is very protectionist. I think in particular, he's very young and doesn't understand our economy. I'm very concerned about that. So obviously vice presidential candidates don't have too much sway over things, but they do have sway in the politics of things. And so leading up to election day and how you look at things. So to me, it's very interesting. It's a completely different campaign. It's a completely different outlook. The polls from when Biden dropped out, previous polling does not matter. We have to have fresh data, fresh polls. We'll look and see what happens. It seems like the Democrats, to me, have more relief. I know there's all these articles about how exuberant they are and energized, and I don't dispute that. I think it's more relief.
Yeah.
And I think the question is, can Harris extend that relief into exuberance that would last longer than a week or two?
Right.
Can that extend out? And how is her campaign going to run around these really critical issues? Is she going to run very progressively, which kind of seems she is? She's talking about childcare, universal childcare, kind of traditional and progressive focus, where Trump's going to focus on red meat, kind of border security and tax cuts. And so the contrast is going to be I think even more than Biden. I think she's a little bit more progressive than Biden. So I think the contrast is going to be really different than what we've seen in a while. It's going to, and then we'll see who bends, who pulls back the language a little bit and kind of protects or try to get more independence or more folks. So we'll see what happens. But I think Trump's the same Trump, maybe worse. I think Harris is an old school progressive that we haven't seen in some time.
Maybe worse.
Who knows? I'm not sure. I mean, there is an unknown there, but I do think a lot of what she would look at around free trade agreements is around technology, IP protection, and worker rights. And I think when you think progressive on trade, it's traditionally free trade must be fair trade. And so they look a lot at worker issues in the U.S. and then also worker rights abroad. And it remains to be seen. We need to hear more from her on what she actually believes now, because obviously candidates will transition their viewpoints, and political calculus comes into play where she needs to get votes from certain parts of the country, and her viewpoints may well adapt to that. And so that kind of the free market of political ideas will force her into certain issues in certain ways. So we'll see.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I think are important to point out. One, I agree with you. I still think the blue wall is critically important. And I know some forecasters have said, hey, look, Trump's got 7 or 8 paths to the electoral college victory, which is what matters. And at the time, Biden had 1, if that, he had to thread the needle. Does that open up for Harris to 1 or 2 or 3? It gets a little broader. Will she pivot on, fracking? Will she be more pro energy independence because Pennsylvania is in play? Will she pick Governor Josh Shapiro as a running mate? These are all questions I think we have to consider. I do think there's some orthodoxy that's been disrupted that we all know about internally because we've worked in campaigns, but that this notion the American people aren't paying attention until kind of post-Labor Day. And then as we get into October, they really start to solidify their views relative to how they're going to vote, and that undecided start to break one way or the other. I still think that dynamic will play largely to the same effect, but I think people are paying attention now like they normally don't because of several reasons. One, because of the debate was early. It was an early debate, and it was at the request of the current president. Tragically so, it looks like at this point. But for the betterment, I think, of the American political process, clearly. Then you have the assassination attempt, and now you have the new candidate on the Democratic side. I think we're going to know more earlier than we typically do. And as we always kind of preach within FDRA to our members, that don't pay attention to the national, head-to-head polls. Even if Harris is up nationally a point or two, she will probably lose, as we've seen in the prior elections the last few years. Pay attention to the continued polling from places like Emerson, one of our favorite polling firms in Pennsylvania. Pay attention to the state polls, specifically in this blue wall area. That will really start to show you if she's down in Pennsylvania and it's sustained and she can't claw that back, they're not going to win. I mean, they're really not. And I think that's something that our listeners should be honed in on as it relates to the different polls that kind of come at us over the next few weeks and months.
No matter what, I think it's important to prepare for tariff increases right now. I mean, just assume that that's going to happen. I think, with Trump, he is going to get even tougher on China. I mean, as you pointed out, he's thrown around 60% tariffs on Chinese-made goods. He talked about tariffs on Mexico, looking at Chinese manufacturing there. He's talked about a 10% across-the-board tariff. Not all of that gets done, but some of it does get done, and he has the power to do that unilaterally in some cases, not all cases. But I would expect that to happen quickly, too, once he gets in. That's really one area where he's changed some policy positions over the year on some key issues. Trade is not one where he has changed.
Well, hey, Thomas, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to add to your list, and you can keep going. People should remember we were doing a 301 investigation on Vietnam products when they left office. We had a hearing in January of 2021, and they were starting to eyeball Vietnam for 301 tariffs. They could kind of kick that back up depending on who's at USTR and what Bob Lighthizer does relative to the administration. So sorry to interrupt, but we should add Vietnam to the list as well.
No, yeah, I think, but also I just think it's different mindsets on government institutions, things like that. With the two different paths we could go down, it's not, not with Harris, even the stuff she said on trade. And I know we're talking just trade right now. It's still kind of within that traditional framework where we should look to use our trade agreements for adding, climate change and tackling these environmental issues with that. We need stronger labor protections within our trade agreements, within the existing ones. And then you shift over to Trump, and he is looking for kind of a whole new model here where he's going to really get even tougher on China, go bigger, go higher, much higher tariffs. But then in these other areas, whether it comes to, we talked about drilling, taxes, that's an interesting area where, what does that look like? Because if you go back and watch the debate between Trump and Biden, if you're able to do that, one thing he did tout was the tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts. And, he said, he talked about the tax cut being cut down from 39% to 21% and how that I'll read the quote here. I got it pulled up. We took in more revenue with much less tax, and companies were bringing back trillions of dollars back into our country. The country was going like never before. We're ready to start paying down debt. We're ready to start using the liquid gold right under our feet. He talked about getting hit with COVID, but he said because the tax cuts spurred the greatest economy that we've ever seen just prior to COVID and even after COVID, it was so strong that we were able to get through COVID much better than just about any other country. So I think he's looking at, Vance has he's more willing to go after corporate America. I'd be interested to see kind of what President Trump's view on taxes looks like, considering to him that's one of his biggest accomplishments. Is he going to use those arguments as, okay, I'm hitting companies with tariffs, but I'm continuing lower taxes, or I'm lowering taxes further? I don't know. It's a really that's another area where there's going to be some potential shakeups as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's going to be a lot of churn, and I think it's going to be hard for companies to figure out, because I think you're right. I think Trump could increase tariffs and still try to pass like corporate tax cuts at the same time, and I think Harris could freeze tariffs as to where they are, not change them, but you could see tax rates go up for corporations.
Right.
So CFO level's got a lot of work coming up for them to figure out and scenario plan both of those things. But I think the bigger challenge for all of us is that no one's talking about balanced budgets with all the debt that we have. Nope. And so if you're paying for universal child care or any other program that Trump may want to enact,
tax cuts,
whatever it is there's no balance to it, and so it's a little concerning in that sense. But it is, that's what happens, right? We run on these things and promises, and then reality hits when you get in the door, and the weight hits you, and then you've got to make decisions for what's in front of you. I'm surprised that Harris, in some of these polls, I know nationally, just looking at it, that she pulled even so soon. One thing that really was interesting to me was there's not much volatility in the polling from when Biden had, his debate disaster to where the assassination attempt of Trump happened, right? Biden dropped points, right? Single digits, not double digits.
Yeah.
Trump didn't gain double digits, single digits up. So this volatility is not really happening, or you would see it in a normal session where it's like, oh my God, I can't vote for that guy. Or, oh my God, like he survived an assassination attempt. How strong is he, going into that? It's not that volatile between that, which it speaks to how split everybody is. But
we essentially have two incumbents too, right?
Yeah.
Trump and Harris are both, they're not incumbents, but they are. It's weird.
Yeah. But then, but still, you're looking at people who are undecided, and I think some of that is whether they'll vote at all. There's some undecideds that are just wondering, they're wanting an option. So we'll see. That's why the Harris thing is interesting to me, because the most curious thing for me is looking at how a person who was not going to vote in the election because they didn't like Biden or Trump, will they now reconsider looking at a Harris presidency? How much do they hate Trump or not like him and not want him in? Or are they just benign on it and just saying, again, this is more of the same. Yeah, she's younger and capable, but I don't like any of that. So it's going to be really interesting to judge it. But those are fine margins. It's like less than 10% of the U.S. is undecided at this point.
Yeah, it's tough.
And so, and then it also changes the demographics of how you go after votes, where Trump was boasting how many gains he had with the black community. Seemingly with a black candidate at the top of the ticket, that would mitigate that. That would mitigate the growth and bring it back to the Democrats. Those are the things that I'm watching, is not just at state level, but the demographics as to how Hispanics may look from a conservative, social conservative versus, Democrat and immigration issues, blacks with the economy and Trump and that narrative, but also with a black woman at the top of the ticket. I think women is the difference between now when a woman is running for president, Hillary Clinton. I think it's just the Clinton name and the tie to her. And I think it's completely different now with all these abortion issues popping up and all that. I think women, I think the whole election hinges on this. Women are going to go probably Democrat heavy in a lot of states and churn out. The question really is black males. And Hispanics and kind of young people. Will young people show up or not? And that's not too different than what you might read in the newspapers. But the challenge that we have is like sifting through all this noise to get down to what the actual signal is. And I think the more we can just go down to a base level and say there's 5 things that matter. That's what I'm looking at. It's like, what are the 5 things that matter? Yes, it's these 3 states, and it's these 3 demographics that we have to look at, and everything else is decided by someone. All right. And sometimes politics, we try to be really clever, and it's really simple. It's like right in front of our face. So
yeah, for sure.
Anything else to wrap up? I think we covered some of the politics, some of the policy stuff.
The member call is so critically important, Andy, and I know I got to run, but the member call, we talk about this consistently. So as things change, join us if you're an FDRA member, 2:00 East Coast time every Tuesday. Yes, plug that for sure. Look on FDRA.org. You'll see that on there that you can sign up for it if you're a member. It is free. All right, more to come. I'm sure we'll do another one of these when we actually have some debates and more information on the Democratic platform to compare against the Republican platform, and see who can be the most consistent with their comments. I think some of this is going to hinge on who goes off script to help us learn our shift voter perceptions and where people are headed. But appreciate you guys joining us along for the ride. We'll see what happens. Keep positive. No matter what happens, people are going to buy shoes. So next Monday, new podcast episode drops. Make sure you take a listen. We appreciate you joining us. And until next time, Shoe-In is out.
Shoe-In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.